All right, so I know you've seen this in the store. It's called that injectable butter, right? And a lot of people use it. I use a technique before I actually season the meat with seasoning is injecting it, right? And I like to inject, especially when I'm cooking whole chickens or whole turkeys, I like to inject it deep. I inject it quite often, and I make sure that I'm injecting, if there's a bone involved, down to the bone. Now, my technique, and this is something that I developed once I did my first whole turkey, was I used this initially. And you see here, that's chicken stock. And what I'll do is I will warm up the chicken stock and melt my butter up in it. I mean, y'all already thinking about it, right? Think of the flavoring. I want you to think of like a chicken soup with some melted butter up in it. Okay, and we're gonna put that all up in the chicken. I'm going to inject that. Now, another technique that I use is I sprinkle a little bit of seasoning into it as well. Because why? I want it to take on all the way to the bone the flavoring of the meat. So if you have a special seasoning, you know, whether it be Lawry's or Adobe or Adobo, I believe, and then I'm going to show you the seasonings that I use. You can sprinkle a little bit of that in there. And as you're heating it up with all that butter and the chicken stock, you start your injection. Let's inject this chicken. We're going to go over here. So now we're going to get into injection. Now, the key about injection is you've seen this device. You could spend some money on quite an expensive one. When I bought the injectable butter, it actually came with its own injection tool. So we're going to take this injection tool, and I spoke to you about the brine that I use and how I mix it up. Once you put the tool in there, you're going to slightly pull up. And look at it just filling up, right? It's filling up with all that good mixture. Now, for me, I told you my technique is to get all the way to the bone. So I'm going to start there. When I inject this chicken, you want to insert as deep as you can. And as you pump, you want to slowly pull out. Look at that, right? Not all the way. And then I'm going to go here again, deep into the bone. And as I'm pushing it, I'm going to slowly pull out. Same thing here. I'm going to go deep into the meat. As I'm injecting it, slowly pull out. Now, the same technique, if we come back here to the brine, you notice that the same technique, right? And I'm sorry, I call this brine. This is my broth mixture. The same technique I'm going to employ when I do the breast. And I'm going to be liberal. I'm going to give this a lot of injection. So I'm going to go here, deep into the meat. As I inject, slowly pull out. Same thing here. I'm going all up in the breastises and slowly pull out. Same thing here, right? So again, a lot of these guys talk about not piercing their meat. Injecting your meat requires you to pierce it a little bit, but again, be liberal. This is going to add that juice and that flavor all the way down. All the way down. See how it's popping out? And it's going to season it all the way down to the meat. So that part is all about, so I'm going to take my time. I'm going to keep injecting this meat, and then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to put some seasonings on this mug. Now we're going to get all into the seasonings. And I told you before, when I season meat, I like to get intimate. They call it putting the love up into it. I call it getting intimate with your meat. Now, I'm expecting my check in the mail. When it comes to my chicken, I had a coworker, thank you, JC, for showing me much love, who bought this seasoning for me when I was getting into my smoking career. It's called Yardi Rub. And let me tell y'all something. This is the 100% go-to when you're seasoning chicken. Now, it's very versatile. I've even used it on pork. I've used it when I fry chicken. I've used it on all cuts of meat. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to the Yardi bird, check in the mail, I use the Yardi bird. Now, let's come over here to the chicken. Now, I told you before, I tend to pull my skin back because I'm going to use it like a jacket, right? But something I learned from my daughter, if you're going to season your meat, you need to commit. So do not, I'm talking about lightly glaze it. That ain't going to do too much for you. When you're going to season your meat, remember, you're going to put your jacket on. Take the time, y'all, and season. Watch this here. Season the bird. Okay? Get all up in there. Get intimate. Get intimate with your meat. Don't be afraid to touch it. Get all up in there. Get all up in there. And this is going to be front and back. Now, remember what I said about my jacket. Once I've seasoned this meat, right, I'm going to take that skin and I'm going to use it like a jacket. And that is what I use as a technique to keep the seasonings all up on the meat. Now, again, get intimate with your meat now. Touch it. Get all up in there. Now that I've got my jacket on, right? What am I going to do with this chicken? I'm going to flip it over. Flip it over. Let's go ahead and do a little hand cleaning. Let me use this here. And we going right back to the Yardie Bird. Again, commit. Commit to your seasonings, y'all. Don't front on it. Get all up into the wing. Because we're going to take our hand once we're done. We're going to make sure that our seasonings done touched all up into the meat. This is what I'm talking about, getting intimate, right? Rubbing it all down in your jacket. Make sure your wing is covered with all your seasonings. Get all up into the jacket, right? Pull it around. Say, okay, you notice I got some juices going. That's from the injection. And again, that is okay because I'll actually use these juices later on when I show you about, basting and keeping flavor on the top of your meat. So again, I'm all intimate with my meat. Now that's seasoning the chicken. The same premise, let me just do a quick wipe here. I'm gonna have you come around this way, is take another look. Again, expecting the check in the mail. When it comes to beef, my man JC hooked me up again. This is called Holy Cow Barbecue Rub. And let me tell y'all something. You put it on beef ribs, pork ribs, beef shoulder, beef steaks. I mean, you call it this right here, the Holy Cow. Guess what? Holy cow. Now, take a look here at these ribs. Again, if you're going to spend the time seasoning your meat, go ahead and commit. So when it comes to my ribs, I'm all up in there, nice and slow, right? I'm making sure that I get a good coverage. Now, the main difference with this, I'm not going to spend too much of my seasoning on the bone, right? Because when it comes to ribs, the bone is on the backside. I'm going to focus my seasonings here on the meat because as this cooks and it lays down into the meat, that's going to add all that flavor to the top of it. Let me get these right here. That's seasoning, y'all. So, once again, when it comes to seasoning, we went through the whole techniques. The first thing is to break your meat down. Get all that unnecessary fat. We call it the ineditable, right? There's ineditable, and that's the fat. That was the cutting. The second part we talked about was the difference. Well, actually, this was the first part between do you do a dry brine or do you do a wet brine? And we talked about the techniques for each, right? After you break your meats down, the last thing we talked about was the actual seasoning part. And as you can see here, don't front on yourself. Commit to seasoning your meat. Now, the next episode that I'm going to get into, we're really going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the actual smoking, right? I'm going to put on the wood chips and show you how I set up the smoker. But in the meantime, we about to eat, y'all. So thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Big A Smoking with Big A show. I want you to hit subscribe. I want you to share this with other people. And I hope that these techniques, just like me, allows you to make a good meal for your friends, your family, and those you love. Until next time.